Hey, what's up, everyone? Stevie Peavy, everyone's favorite guy with a brand new podcast, Heavy Metal War Stories. That's right. Let me give you a little rundown about what this podcast is going to be about. Every week, I'm going to have some road dog on with me. I'm not saying it's going to be a heavy metal superstar. I mean, it will be sometimes, but not all the time, because that's boring. Let's face it. Anybody who's going to come on, though, is going to be a touring person, whether they're in front of the stage, rocking out their guitar, or they're a roadie, or they're who knows what, but they're going to be some interesting motherfuckers. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into two parts. First thing, I'm going to introduce who it is, and we're not going to really go into it again, like, hi, how are you doing? Anyway, first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about a classic heavy metal band, because let's face it, every fucking heavy metal fan loves to just talk about their favorite heavy metal artists at length. So we're going to go over if they kicked ass, which of course, they did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about them. And after that, we'll just kind of go into what their best shit was, where they went wrong, if they ever went wrong. So geek out a little bit with some of our favorite heavy metal bands. After that, I'll talk to this guy. I don't really care too much. I want to hear the dirt. Some weird, crazy rock and roll road stories. It doesn't have to be on stage. It could be after stage, under the stage, in the tour bus, with the van broke down. It could be a groupie thing. It could be whatever. Anyway, I've babbled long enough. So let me introduce you my first guest, the very first guest of Heavy Metal War Stories.
Heavy Metal War Stories with your host,
All right, so today we're talking to my good friend Kent Holmes, who, aside from being a guitar tech for tons of famous bands, not the least of which were Poison and LA Guns, is a huge Randy Rhoads fan. So people will probably say, hey, Stevie, you're starting this new podcast, and you said that you were going to be talking about a band a week. And Randy Rhoads is not a band, Randy Rhoads is a person. But let's think about this. I mean, Ozzy, you couldn't just go over Ozzy's whole career in one show. So this will be about Randy Rhoads, and it'll also kind of cover the Randy Rhoads years of Ozzy Osbourne. And so, Kent, you're a diehard fan of Randy Rhoads, and any Randy Rhoads conversation that I would be talking about would be the two Ozzy albums. But let's find out from you. Are we going to go further back when you go to the Japan released albums from Quiet Riot?
I thought this was going to be about Rudy Sarzo.
Well, yeah, if you're a huge Rudy fan, we could do that instead. But
I had some badass like Ricky Ricardo material ready to go, and now it's just I don't know what to do, man.
Right. Well, you just begin from the beginning, and I'll listen.
All I really know about are the two Ozzy albums. The other stuff, I've got a couple of the tracks here and there, but it's
not that good, right?
It's not that good. That's the problem. Yeah.
All right. So
you can hear all the elements are there, but it didn't quite all come together in a cohesive whole until those Ozzy albums, really.
All right, so let's think about this. Would you say that, Ozzy left Black Sabbath and he was a drunk and he was going nowhere, and in short order, after meeting Randy Rhoads, the next couple of years he was kicking Black Sabbath's ass, and they even got Ronnie Dio. So can we attribute it all to Randy? Was it Randy that made Ozzy?
Well, it's kind of all backwards in there and stuff like that. But it wasn't just Randy that made Ozzy. It was kind of like gave him a clean break with the 70s, and he managed to walk into the 80s and sort of be a modern contemporary artist, whereas Sabbath, even with Dio, was still sort of like the gothic, dark metal 70s thing. It was really like the Rainbow albums, only with Tony Iommi's riffs.
I've always said that. I don't want to get too heavy into Sabbath and Dio today, but Dio steps into this legendary band Sabbath and just turns it into his own thing. It sounds like those albums sound like they could be Dio records.
Yeah, and the classic part, of course, is that's where Geezer stops writing lyrics, and all of a sudden you've got all these Sabbath songs that are about knights and princes and rainbows.
Exactly.
And unicorns, probably. I always thought that Bob Rules was probably about a unicorn.
Yeah, probably. But so Randy Rhoads joins Ozzy, and Bob Daisley had a lot to do with the songwriting as well, from what I've heard.
Well,
But
and you know what's going on there is it was a very conscious decision on the sort of the Osbournes, if you will, even though at the time it was Mrs. Arden, but part to go and get a Californian guitar player because they'd been Sabbath was just getting their asses kicked by Van Halen, so it's kind of like, hey, there's this new thing going on. These guys don't sound like old blues players sped up. Let's go get one of these guys, and they just happened to get a really good one. I mean, they could have ended up with
George Lynch.
They could have ended up with George Lynch, which wouldn't have been very good. And
How much credit does Randy get for those two albums? I mean, the lead's 100% him, but if it wasn't Randy, could those? And you still had Bob Daisley, you still had Ozzy. Could those albums have been anywhere in the league they were?
absolutely not.
Why not?
It's the thing that people always forget about with your guitar players, and especially your little buddy Randy Rhoads there, is that they are, in general, about 100% responsible for the actual construction of music. And it's like the thing with Randy Rhoads that you lost immediately after Randy Rhoads died, in Ozzy's own band, was that if you listen to those songs, it's not just about the cool riffs, it's not just about the cool leads. To me, it's sort of the tonal character, and the character isn't right, the sort of the topography of it all. It's like where they take the songs, it's like you never get a Randy Rhoads song, for instance, like like Crazy Train, right? It starts off in F sharp minor. It's all like, bitching and metal and stuff, and it's all like, you're, down in there.
Let's just mention Kent decided to bring his guitar along for this interview for some musical illustrations. So, as you were saying.
It's like that old saying, it's talking about music is like tap dancing about architecture. So I don't know what that means, but
I've
so anyway,
often
so
said that myself.
You've got the badass, it's in this excellent F sharp minor thing. It's all like, one of the most metal keys. And then,
Seriously, Judas Priest, another thing coming right there.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like you got another thing coming does exactly that. It stays in F sharp minor, it's
Right.
like, and the verses are over that. With the Randy Rhoads, it starts in the F sharp minor, then immediately goes to this sort of happy like A major verse, right? Right?
I've always
it's
thought it got a lot happier than I expected it to.
Well, it's not just that it gets happy. It goes somewhere that people just weren't taking songs. It's like you listen to your basic Sabbath song, and it'll start in some depressing key, and then it'll be in that depressing key for 7 minutes, and then it will end.
Well, Crazy Train's an interesting illustration because those lyrics are pretty depressing, but you're right. The music is not depressing. You got this little kind of the happiest thing you ever heard Ozzy sing over, these standard sad lyrics.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I mean, Daisley, it's like, to my mind, it's like Daisley gets too much credit because it's like there's become this sort of narrative about the Ozzy years, that goes, well, Ozzy basically didn't do anything. He got this hotshot guitar player, and then he got this guy who wrote the lyrics. And people are generally too stupid to realize that lyrics and vocal line are different things, right?
Right.
And Ozzy is really, really good with vocal melodies. And it's like, so people go like, well, Geezer wrote the lyrics in Sabbath, and Bob Daisley wrote the lyrics on his solo record, so he didn't do anything. And it's like, yeah, so you take a melody line, like in Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? That existed for like hundreds of years before some idiot put the words Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and it was still the same song. Da, 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 And
Right.
it's like, that's what Ozzy does. He's the guy who comes up with that.
No,
and it's
I
like
mean,
you can plug in
Ozzy's
pretty
not
much
Rob
any-
Halford. He's and people forget that. They go, well, he doesn't do the Bruce Dickinson screams. He's not like Dio.
That's
But
another thing people don't get about Ozzy, though, is that there's a certain tonal characteristic about his voice where he sounds like he's not singing anything that is that impressive. But then you try and do that, and he's one of the highest goddamn singers ever.
and that
it's
Sabbath, Bloody
like-
Sabbath. I mean,
You get into
no one
Sabbath,
can do
Bloody
that.
Sabbath, or what's that one?
Symptom of the
Symptom-
Universe.
Yeah, that shit is high shit.
That is high shit.
And he did this weird thing. It's like this sort of reverse trajectory of what most singers do. It's like the first Sabbath albums are like the lower stuff. And it's like each album he gets higher and higher and higher. And by volume 4, and like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, he's singing way the hell up there.
And the interesting thing is that Tony was getting lower and lower at the exact same time.
Oh, yeah. And that's when they're like tuning down and all that kind of thing. And it's like, and then Ozzy is going like up and up. And it's like his lowest stuff is like on the first album, Paranoid, I mean, those songs are very, very mid-range for Ozzy, you know? And it's like, but then they just keep getting higher and higher.
All right, well, let's not take the tension away from Randy Rhoads. So let's talk. I agree with you. I think Ozzy.
But I mean, that's his big contribution to Ozzy, as far as I'm concerned. It's compositional, you know. It's and all those songs are all in, it's like interesting keys. You know, it's like the original Ozzy albums aren't really. I mean, yeah, there are songs in like E and A, but there's songs in G sharp minor.
What's in G sharp minor?
What's that? The Over the Mountain is that's all G sharp minor. Yeah. And it's like, you've got your F sharp songs, if you're like, it's like they're all over the place. There's a couple of them that like fall in like the E and the A, but there's like, that's another sort of break that happened with that band, was it like you don't get any of sort of the boogie woogie chord structures. There's no carryover from like AC/DC.
Yeah, there's not a bit of blues in there.
Yeah, I mean, though there is a lot of rock and roll. That's another thing that people annoy the shit out of me about, because it's like, they go, oh yeah, Randy Rhoads, he was bringing this neoclassical thing into it. And it's like, yeah, there were a lot of douchebags out there doing neoclassical at the time, and, it's like they didn't bring the rock to the table at the same time. And this is like the thing that Randy Rhoads was doing, and why those Quiet Riot albums didn't really come together for me, is that like, you can hear the disparate influences that he's got going on in sort of the late 70s stuff he's doing, but it's not until the Ozzy thing where he's doing this sort of perfect melding of like the neoclassical and the rock and roll sort of, the stuff that he picked up from like Mick Ronson,
Sure.
You'll have this in like the same solo. You'll have
See, you're far more musical than me. When I think of what Randy picked up from Mick Ronson, I'm thinking dress sense, like the polka.
Well, it's not so much the dress sense as the haircut.
Yeah.
And I was hoping we would get to talk about
but please educate everyone else who's not quite as musically retarded as myself about the Randy Mick Ronson musical connection.
Well, Mick Ronson, of course, was the guitar player from Bowie's Spiders of Mars band. He was a really, really good basic rock and roll player, but he like he brought a little bit of the sort of classical feel to it, just because I don't think it's possible to grow up in Europe without like getting inundated with that, But he brought that, and there's a very specific tonality in Randy Rhoads' stuff, like in his guitar tone, there's this massive amount of mid-range, right? And it's what kind of makes the solos kind of sing more than a lot of the guys at the time did.
Well, it's the opposite of like thrash metal, where you scoop out every bit of mid-range.
Well, yeah, this is the exact opposite. If you were to look at the curve on his equalizer, it would look like a frown as opposed to the smile one, which is sort of thrash metal thing. And it's like Mick Ronson. It's like you listen to like it's like the Ziggy Stardust. It's so mid-rangey. It's like he said, reaching for switches. It's like that whole. It's like really in your face. Like it's not the standard sort of chug chug or anything that people were doing at the time. And Randy Rhoads picked up a lot of that. Conversely, though, it kind of made his rhythm sound like crap. I mean. He is probably the single of the biggest guitar players ever that are like, the bitch in his guitar players had one of the worst guitar sounds going into it, I mean, you think of like Eddie Van Halen or Hendrix, and they have these, beefy, manly guitars, like tones. And like you listen to the Randy Rhoads, and it's, it's a distortion plus through a Marshall with some EQ, and it sounds like it's fuzzy and all that, but it works great for the lead stuff and for like bringing out all those weird little fills that Rhoads would do. It's like in the middle of some sort of a riff, you would go into like some little fill, and it just jumps out at you. And it's because of all that weird mid-range that he picked up from Mick Ronson.
Well, was that a little bit of a stylistic change as the 80s started? Because, Tony Iommi would never like slide into a 2-second fill, And I'm sure tons of like LA.
He would slide into a 7-minute long fill.
Thank you.
Would name it something.
But I know there's probably a ton of LA 80s hot shots that were like doing that. But Randy Rhoads just popping fills here and there all through the songs was just made it so different from Sabbath.
Yeah. And oh man, what fills? It was like, what the hell? It's like, but I mean, truth be told, a lot of that was also going on with Eddie Van Halen at the same time. They were very much of the the same place and time those two guys were. It's like one went a little further in one direction, one went a little further in the other direction. I think it's great we've got both because, like,
Well, a lot of people they say it's like there was sort of that San Gabriel Valley versus San Fernando Valley. You know, if you're in San Gabriel, you're an Eddie guy. If you're a San Fernando Valley guy, you're a Randy guy. You know anything about that?
some of the most violent riots ever. What valley are you from? San Gabriel. You're going down.
There's this new band called Holy Grail, and they're like full. I don't know if you know them. They're full on, new wave of British heavy metal practically. But they're fairly young guys. They're on tour with Exodus and stuff. But they're from the San Gabriel Valley, and I'm sure they just everything is like, well, do you consider Eddie Van Halen your god? He's the last big guy in 30 years to come out of from where you live.
Yeah. Yeah, it hasn't been a great, like, the last 20 years hasn't been great for LA. It's like, once the whole grunge thing happened, it's like I was stuck in bands in the 90s where it was like, yeah, we're drawing people, and there's no possible way we can get signed out of Los Angeles. Great, because it's just kind of like, so you can't really fault the San Gabriel Valley for not producing a lot of people in the last 20 years because nowhere really has around LA.
Yeah, good point. So let's talk Blizzard versus Diary. I mean, Randy Rhoads, 2 records worth mentioning, 2 records that were ever released in America.
I always get them confused. To me, they're like, it's a single work. They were both done within a year. I mean, it wasn't even like,
Yeah, but everyone's got a favorite, and I know you do too.
I really don't.
Really?
I don't. Yeah, it's one of those things where I can start thinking about like, yeah, I really like this one. There's this and this and this, and then I go, but of course over here there's this, this, and this, and then I'm like, oh, but this one's got this, and it's like, it's like trying to choose between your 2 children if both of them are,
My opinion, I'd have to say, when I was younger, I'd say I was a Blizzard guy because I felt Diary has more filler on it. But now I think Diary has the worst filler, but the best good stuff.
You realize now that I'm going to have to call up the track listings of each on Wikipedia so I can figure out what we're
Well, Blizzard's got Suicide Solution and I Don't Know and Steal Away the Night and Revelation Mother Earth. Those are pretty much the best ones. Crazy Train's a little overplayed. And then Diary's got Over the Mountain, Flying High Again, and, of course, Diary of a Madman, which, I mean, come on. That's the most evil track he ever did.
Well, the thing about the 2 albums, though, is like, it's like, yeah, I couldn't, choose. I think that probably the only album or the only song I think on either of the albums that's I would qualify as filler is probably like No Bone Movies.
Yeah, No Bone Movies isn't all that great.
It just sounds like they're doing a piss take of Van Halen or something, and it was like But let's see, I Don't Know, Crazy Train, Goodbye to Romance, which I've always liked a lot. D, which is kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to argue with that.
Mr. Crowley actually is one song I never liked it as much as like, it's like, people are always like, oh yeah, it's where the neoclassical thing really comes in, and it's kind of like that's why I don't like that song so much.
I like that one a lot.
Oh, everybody does because it's like so dark and gothic, and it's like, and I'm just not into that sort of shit. It's like, yeah, it's a fine song, but I prefer something like I Don't Know or Crazy Train.
See, Crazy Train to me, that happy thing, I like it and all. And, I don't know if I ever need to hear it again just because.
Looking at these track listings, I think I might be a Diary guy, though, that being said.
Do you like the side 2 of Diary? Because I'm not a huge SATO. And...
Oh, man, I love me some SATO.
All
that's
right.
like, I mean, that's one of those things where it's like, that's just the best ever guitar song. And it's got, talk about the weird changes. It's got the E thing, and then it like goes utterly bizarre places before the solos, and it's got that whole like, and it's like, where the hell did that come from? And then it goes into a solo in an entirely different key, with all that weird, stuff, and then it goes straight into like C sharp minor. It's like, how the hell did they get to C sharp minor from, this song that's in E and then has a happy part in A, and then all of a sudden it's that, what is it? Thing, and it's like, how does that happen? And then they end up back in like sort of an A major thing at the end of the solo, or G major with that, which is again a very rock and roll riff after all this sort of neoclassical stuff in the solo. And then they get back out to that like, and it's like, how the hell did they do that? This whole song is sort of like a trick, and it's like, it's got the coolest rhythm. It's got that,
That's the one part so far that you've banged out that I remember.
Yeah, and then they get into that whole thing which is really cool. They're incorporating the fills into the riff, basically, if I can remember it. And it's like, it's just badass, man. It's
Well, let me ask you this, because I mean, Ozzy might not have been the hugest artist at the time, but to he was a name and he was on a record label, and they hire this little kid who's, yes, he's an LA hot shot, but was there? I mean, from what you're saying, Randy was doing some, he was just given free reign to do whatever the fuck he wanted, and was that kind of standard for the time, or do you feel like that was sort of an aberration that Ozzy's like, I believe in this kid, let him do whatever he wants?
I think it's definitely that. And I mean, but you got to remember, it's like you've auditioned a fair number of band members, I'm sure. And it's like when the person walks in that is the right person, it's like, they basically open up their guitar case and you're like, yeah, this is the dude, And I'm sure it was something like that where he probably was, I think the story goes he was tuning his guitar and Ozzy said, you've got the gig or something like that,
I did hear that funny story. I guess, was it post-Randy or pre-Randy where Mark Turan from Bullet Boys kind of got the gig, but that was because he'd given Ozzy tons of blow?
God, I don't know. I know that was all around that time because that's when he would have been leaving Rat and going off to be whatever the hell it was he became, but I don't know if that was post or before. I think it was actually then, though, because I think it was like Ari and Daisley who were telling that story. And they've been around for the post-Randy stuff.
All right,
but I mean, at the same time, then you've got, you've got Don Airey and Bob Daisley and, what's that?
Lee Kerslake.
Lee Kerslake. And they're all like sort of heavy hitters from sort of like the mid-'70s, English heavy rock scene, It's like, the one guy was from like Uriah Heep and like the other was, I know
Rainbow.
Daisley played with a lot of people. Yeah, there's actually some shit where he's playing with Mungo Jerry.
I have no idea who that is.
They're the ones who did that like that weird skiffle in the summertime song, in the summertime. Da, 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 da. But they also played this really heavy, weird blues shit, and it's like there's a couple of like festival appearances with Daisley that are like on YouTube that are really worth looking for. But anyway, so yeah, so it's like, these guys are like heavy hitter, old pro guys from the heavy music scene over there. And then they bring in this kid that, I'm sure nobody had heard those Quiet Riot albums or whatever, And it's like, he must have blown everybody away. They must have just been like, holy shit. And then, like I said, if you listen to the music is very much from him.
Yeah, totally. I mean, people could go, well, Daisley had a lot to do with it too. But then you can say, well, Daisley was on Bark at the Moon, and why isn't that like in the same league as these two?
Yeah, and all of a sudden it's like you've got Jakey Lee in on guitar, and all of a sudden the songs don't really, they stop going places. It's like, Bark at the Moon starts in A major, and it goes on in A major, and, it's got that one weird part before the solo, which sounds like something probably Don Airey came up with because it's all keyboards, and then that's pretty much, it's like, you can tell that the compositional sense was Randy's, and it's like I think that these old dudes like were pretty much like, wow, this guy rocks. Let's get out of his way and see what he can do.
So I have one more thing to talk about Randy Rhoads, but I'm going to bring it up, but there's almost no reason to because I know where you're going to stand on this.
It's the haircut, right? I love the haircut.
Yes, thank you. Yes, he does have...
that haircut influenced the 80s more than anything he did with his guitar.
He was a heavy metal Farrah Fawcett.
Yeah. I mean, that haircut, it made it an immediate jump over to Vince Neil, and then it's like, it just ran rampant through the 80s.
And you got to give Mick Ronson a little credit, I think, for that.
Well, it is Mick Ronson's haircut. He elaborated on the classic 72 Mick Ronson do, made it a little longer, maybe even a little more layered, and that was really the defining thing that took the haircut from the 70s and put it smack in the middle of the 80s.
Well, no less a source than Lemmy has said, Randy was a great kid and Randy was a great guitarist, but he wasn't all that when he was alive. Dying was a pretty good, at least career move for cementing legendary status. And I doubt you're going to agree with that assessment, but what do you think? I mean, he was a guy who had a chance to do 2 records and then just be gone, never had an alcohol addiction, never did some lame shit, never joined Warrant.
Well, most of those guys ended up in Whitesnake, but
Yeah, I mean, if it's like Eddie. If Eddie had died right after Fair Warning came out, I mean, never had any of the weird shit
Yeah,
that
if he
happened
didn't
after
have the
that.
last 10 years, like once the internet wasn't kind to a lot of those guys because, they got to be sort of like, you know, um, the young star guys. And then like once people got to learn about, well, they're also complete douchebags, the
So, what do
last
you
10
think?
years of internet has not been.
Did Randy benefit from the whole Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix thing of just kind
Oh,
of
I
dying
don't
when
think
you're
so at
tall?
all. I don't think so at all.
No.
Yeah, if anything, I think that he got shortchanged by it because those two albums that he got to do were quick, dirty, cheap records. They were done in a farm with a sort of a B-list, producer. I mean, the guitar tones are bad. You can tell they just kind of like set up and played, and that became the albums. And it's like, I don't think he ever got to do his career-defining work. I mean, a lot of people are like, I mean, I think what he did is great, but it's like, I don't think he ever got to make like, like if Metallica had disappeared before like Master of Puppets, or if you're a Black Album guy, the Black Album. It's
I'm
like,
gonna even add something. If Kiss had all died in a plane crash right after Alive, or even before Alive, every fucking Rolling Stone reporter would be giving hand jobs to them like they're this proto-punk new outgrowth of the New York Dolls, like amazing band that no one really ever got to know.
well, and I think they would have gotten a lot more flattering write-up in mime magazines as well. I mean, the mime, they just aren't seen for what they really
Oh, the
are.
mime magazines. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. All right, you're a better authority on that than I.
Yeah, well, it's like some of the things that they were doing, especially when there was some air guitar things that they did early on that were just breathtaking. But it's like to me, Randy Rhoads is sort of like if Kiss had died before making Alive, and all they had to stand on were those crappy sounding early albums that some people like because of the crap sound. But it's like, come on, it's like here are the songs presented poorly, recorded poorly. They were cheap, they were rushed, they don't sound great, And then it's like Alive blows up, and they get to do a couple albums of decent work before then collapsing in on themselves and doing bullshit for the rest of their careers. But it's like Rhoads never got to make that the career-defining moment album. It was like they never had the good produced Ozzy album. It's like by the time the money actually did start coming in for Ozzy, it was like, I mean, Bark at the Moon had it was so much more like present, it was like, it was in your face. I mean, they were on like American Bandstand with the single, and it's like, they actually got to put some money into that. And it's like, if Randy would have been around for like that, or like once they got Zach, they really started sounding like, these big pro records, which might have been even too corporate, but it would have been great had he been able to be there for one of those sort of things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was a huge fan of both those records. Don't get me wrong. I don't listen to them as much as I used to. There's just, if people had to ask me Randy versus Eddie, I would take Randy because Van Halen's. I'm a Roth guy. I think if you had to pick one guy who's the most valuable player of Van Halen, I'd take Roth. I like Eddie's stuff, but Randy, those leads, I can, I don't know most of them. I couldn't play any of them, but I could sing almost, all of his most classic ones. So.
Really? I didn't realize your range was that high.
You didn't realize what?
Your range was that high.
What do you? Oh, to sing Randy Rhoads leads?
Yeah.
Some of them I sing an octave lower. It's mostly in the shower.
Dude, I got like thick softy just thinking about that sort of vocal range, and I'm disappointed now.
Yeah, I don't have the highest.
I mean,
voice.
I'm glad that both of them exist because I'm like I really like me some Eddie Van Halen as well, but it's not as it's the sort of thing where it's like it's like Van Halen is kind of like an onion where you peel a layer away and there's just the same layer under it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Randy stuff is kind of like you can appreciate it on several levels. It's stupid pop metal, but then you like peel back a little and there's this like musicality underlying it. Then you peel that back a little and there's this weird sort of like compendium of sort of 70s rock stuff going on. You peel that away and there's something else and there's something else. It's like it's got a certain depth, and that's why I listen to those records like still, because it's like the musical ideas still sound fresh. And it's like, as much as I love Eddie Van Halen, it's like, to me, his guitar style and like, even to some extent, the writing on the Van Halen albums and stuff was more about almost like an athleticism. You know, it's about those fingers jumping around like little acrobats. You know,
Yep.
and it's not so much about, you know, I mean, there was this one point about 5 albums in where you started hearing, you know, Eddie Van Halen repeating licks and stuff, you know, and it was like, okay, so we've pretty much seen what he can do, you know. And I mean, there was still good stuff to come after that, but, you know, that particular well went down so far, and he pulled everything he could out of it, and, you know, and Rhoads said more stuff. You know,
All right. So
since that guy-
final thing on Rhoads, where's he rank in top metal guitarists?
Well, that's for me. I mean,
That's what I'm saying. It's all subjective. There's no friggin', you know, gold medal that everybody agrees on.
Because he's probably my favorite metal guitarist to listen to. Like I said, there's everything there. You know, there's the athleticism of Eddie Van Halen and the fast stuff that makes you go, "Wow, he's playing so fast. That's bitchin', man." But then there's like the melodicism is there, and then like the sort of, you know, the textural tonal thing where it's like he's bringing in like things that people weren't doing, like the you know, his diminished stuff. You know, that's a big deal. Is like, you know, that's a whole new sound he brought to like heavy metal and rock and roll in general. You know, and it's like, you know, yeah, I'd put him, you know, right up at the top. I mean,
Nice.
I don't think anybody could touch him, especially like for the compositional aspect of his soloing. I mean, it's like you do remember those goddamn things. You know, it's not just notes. It's not just fast bullshit. Like you know, love him or hate him, Zakk Wylde is an amazing player, but I can't remember a goddamn thing he's ever done. You know,
Well, I think Zach is just sort of like in Slayer. Well, you know, is that those guys play with such conviction, and in time they can sell anything because they have attitude, conviction, and they play in time. And you know, in Slayer's case, I think they play fucking odd shit with conviction and attitude and in time, and it works. And the odd shit even works for him because it just makes the song sound more evil. Zach kind of sticks to pentatonic, and he's got a lot of attitude. But you're right, he doesn't kind of like, you know, blow your mind with, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
yeah, you don't hear these sort of like, you know, little vocal phrases coming out that are like, you know, that speak to you. You know, they're melodic, and you know, it's like he's probably got as good technique as any guitar player has ever lived, as far as like, you know, speed of picking and
Right.
just getting around on the goddamn fretboard. The guy is a monster, but it's like, you know, but he's talking really fast, but he ain't saying nothing. You know,
Interesting. All right. Well, I think we've given Randy.
can't tell you just saw Slayer, by the way.
Yeah, I was actually given 4 tickets by my Swedish gal pal Svetlana, who didn't make it back from Sweden in time, so we checked that out, and they were good, but they were kind of old men, kind of just doing what they're gonna be doing.
Yeah, I'm kind of frightened by that. It's like I keep going and seeing these old men bands now, and it's like it's there's something vaguely depressing about it. You know, it's like on the one hand you're like, yeah, they're still kicking ass, and then at the other hand you're like, they look like everybody's grandpas, and it's like they've got nothing new to add. You know, they've done what they're gonna do, and it's like I don't really understand what it's for at that point. Like the whole music thing, it's like, you know, where you're just sort of, you know, living off past glories, and you know, it's like the Scorpions show with Kicks one the other night there. It's like, you know, it's like, yeah, it's good and they're doing it well, but why are they getting up there? You know, what are they trying to sell? What are they trying to do? You know, I mean, are they really bringing like their fresh ideas to a crowd and a new crowd? It's like all that's gone, and it's just sort of, you know, it's like a recital. You know, it's like going and seeing Beethoven or something being done, where it's like you're not going to get anything new out of it. You know,
It's a very jaded opinion, but you're not 100%
I mean,
wrong.
that's when you were saying there with the Lemmy saying that Rhoads benefited from dying young. It's kind of like he's kind of a funny person to be saying that, because
Well, he said it when he was like 42. No,
I know, but I almost wonder if part of it is that, like, you know, any point after the first couple of Motorhead albums, there's a realization on Lemmy's part that, you know,
they've done what they're gonna do.
and they're going to be doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over.
Well, I'm going to give a sneak preview because we're certainly doing a Motorhead show pretty soon, and that is exactly my opinion. I mean, I'm not one of these freaking assholes who, oh, it's always the old stuff. No band ever does anything good after their first few records. But Motorhead, once you lose Fast Eddie and Brian Robertson, it's
I really
okay,
liked the
but-
Brian Robertson album. I'm
Me
glad-
too.
Yeah.
All right, so
He
anyway,
took them somewhere a little different, but not so much that it became like unidentifiable.
people
but
acted like it was super different.
it was his headband. If he didn't have that headband, then he would have
Yeah,
been
the
accepted.
headband fucking rocked. All right, so I think we've done that section, and
It's a
now
little lover boy, though. A little bit lover boy.
and there's nothing wrong with that. So, Ken, now it's time for part 2 of the show, and that's pretty much going over your war stories. The whole name of the show is Heavy Metal War Stories, and I know you've got them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have invited you to be on the show. We're not going to go through your entire history, a la Randy Rhoads, but I just want to give people a little bit of knowledge. Kent somehow came from some small town USA. This is all I know. And he came to LA, and in short order, he was BFFs with all of Poison, and he was their guitar tech. I know he was a guitar tech for LA Guns, and LA Guns were perennial openers for every big act of the time. So Kent was around pretty much every 80s hard rock act that LA Guns was ever on. So you tell me how all that came about.
I moved out here to go to GIT because it seemed like, at the time, it had no reputation yet, so it didn't have the sort of the dork fest reputation. But it was like, wow, I could take this little bit of money I've got for like further schooling and move to California, and then I can hang out with like Van Halen and Motley Crue and stuff, right?
And you practically did.
Yeah, it kind of worked. Is the funny part. It's like I came out here and I decided GIT wasn't for me. I quit in like 6 weeks. And
Why not? I mean, it sounds like you wanted all that Randy kind of schooling concept.
I was a teenager and I liked heavy metal, and GIT at the time didn't really do rock. It was all this really, really heavy jazz fusion shit that I just didn't get, and I still really don't. It's all these people who get so good at guitar that they are unable to play anything that is not boring.
Right.
And they would wheel these guys out and they would play this stuff, and it was like, and I'd be like, I guess it's good, but I don't understand why that man is doing this, And it's like, so I basically quit. I didn't want to learn this sort of music as mathematics thing that they were doing at the
And
time.
you went out and made friends with Poison.
Well, not so much. I went and I lived with a bunch of dudes, and since I was a teenager, I ran out of all my money immediately because I didn't know fucking anything, and I ended up living in my car, and which is a '72 Cutlass, which is a nice roomy back seat. But one of the guys I'd met in the intervening time was a roommate of mine for a while, and he was from Pennsylvania. And he's like, well, I'm going to go stay with my friend's band, and, you can come by and take showers and stuff. And I was like, sweet, because I was living in a '72 Cutlass. So I started doing that, and then I was like, well, I could just, I could park my car around this neighborhood, and then I'm right here. And eventually they told me to go away. But in the meantime, I've always had a sort of an art thing going on, so I was painting drum heads for them and backdrops and shit like that. So I come back after a couple of weeks, and they're like, where have you been? We've been looking everywhere. We've got this big show coming up at the country club. And the band was Poison. And then their guitar tech just sucked. I mean, great guy. I mean, I still wish I knew where he was right now. But, he just, when the chips were down, he wasn't that good with guitar stuff. And
That can be important when that's your whole job.
Yeah, I'm a complete guitar dork, so I started being CC's guitar tech when they were a club band, and it was like, what? I get to live inside the house? Cool. And, within like a year or two, they were huge, and I got fired. So it's kind of the perfect Cinderella story, except for at the end.
Why'd you get fired?
Because I was a teenage kid, and I wasn't capable on the arena level of sort of like, I mean, the guitar tech thing gets a lot of negativity, towards it, because it's, it's like the classic roadie guy from the '70s, he's got the Harley Davidson shirt and the beard, and he's going, hey, little girl, if you blow me, I'll give you a pass, and it's like, that's what people think of. But it's a really, really high pressure job with a lot of shit that can go wrong. It's like, you're basically in charge of this, bizarre audio system that has all these weird components. It's like amps and tubes and, chords and pedals and crap, all over the place. And you have to take this very delicate, very poorly constructed system, hundreds of miles per day, and reconstruct it. Then you have to take it apart, do the same thing day after day.
So you were like 18, and they were saying, "All right, Poison, this guy was awesome for the country club, but he's not coming to Long Beach Arena."
I was actually younger than I had my braces still. I was working for that band, and it was like, it was, and at the same time, it's like the most unpredictable part of that signal chain being CC DeVille, who I still love to this day. I mean, the man is smart and fucking hilarious and really good guy and all that. But, most people just see this sort of image thing that he projects, the character, and it's like, that's the guy I was working for. It's like, it's a high pressure job, and it's like, you're almost set up to fail with like the way that guitars and amps and things are made, and your boss is in front of 20,000 people, and if anything goes wrong, you have seconds to figure out what it is and to replace it.
Sure.
And it's like, and then your boss is CC DeVille when he's first starting to get back into cocaine.
Okay.
I didn't even know what was going on, right? As the money started going in, as the band structure started going up, they actually got a sound guy who was this English dude, and I think he kind of brought it back in because he used to room with me, and I didn't know what was going on. I got braces. I'm a kid from Michigan, right? And and he'd be like, "Kent, have you got a bill?" And I'm like, "Oh, sure, you're good for it. What do you want, a 1, a 5, a 10? He's like, "Any bill." And I'd go, "Here." And he's like, "Do you have a CD case?" And I'm like, "I don't have a CD player, man." He's like, "All right, magic, mate," And then he'd disappear into like a bathroom with DeVille for a half hour, And then you'd see both of them afterwards, and they were smiling a lot and had tons of energy. But, it was just, oh, God. DeVille was using, it was just, it was this comedy of errors. It's like he never had good amplifiers, right? And he liked sort of this big, distorted sound all the time, right? No pedals. It's like, the distorted sound never was less distorted, So it wasn't like it had like a clean sound or, so it was like anything that would like have a buzz or a hum would be magnified intensely, And it's like, and he didn't know at the time, and I didn't know. You'd walk on the stage, you'd walk around on the stage with like the volume knob full up on this thing with the full distortion going. You'd go over by the lighting dimmer packs, which put out all this like electromagnetic stuff, and you'd go, Kent, my guitar is humming. Why is it humming like that? And then I'd go, I don't know, man.
CC was Scottish?
No, haven't you ever heard DeVille?
I mean, yeah, I know he's raspy. He's got that.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Oh, no. It's more boisterous, man.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's got almost a Joan Rivers thing to it.
Oh.
And but it was like having a weird like sort of the bad dad or something, because it was like shit would happen and he'd yell at me, and then he would be so apologetic and nice after.
So who canned you? CC himself, or did some manager?
Shit, I don't know. I think it was probably the English sound guy, because he was, I think, at the time also working as like sort of the tour manager, road manager guy, and it was probably like, Kent, But then they rehired me. I mean, which I don't know what that says, but then I went off to work for Tracy Guns, and Tracy Guns had actually been playing the clubs for a long time, and he knew a lot of things about guitar rigs, and it's like, at this point, I had actually learned a lot myself, so it's like, between the two of us, I actually kind of figured out how the gig works, and then, for the next several years, up until 92, I worked for them.
So Poison was the bigger band, but you and Tracy by then were much more experienced.
At the time, Poison, I mean, it was just this bizarre thing. It was like Tuesdays were when the Billboard numbers would come out, And so every Tuesday we'd be on tour, and like they'd come in for sound check, and it'd be like, Get the album's number 10 this week, and it would be like, and I'd be like, that's great. I replaced this speaker that was like making noise. Check this out, okay? And it was just this surreal thing, because like, here I am in this completely high stress thing, and like DeVille's amps kept failing, right? He got these Marshalls specifically modded by this guy who used to work at SIR named Frank Levi, and him and Frank basically stayed up all night the night before we went on tour, modifying these amps and doing blow, right?
So they're modifying them to sound awesome in a little tiny room and assuming that'll be fine in an arena.
Oh, no. So they go into the box. We never even check them or anything. They come out of the box, 1,000 miles away on tour. And I think there were 3 heads, and like 2 of them didn't work, and the other one just sounded awful. Imagine you're just sitting there all night, like tweaking on blow, going like, oh, and then like, it's like replacing parts and stuff. And it's like, and all we had were these crate practice amps, right? So it's like, so I'm like, fuck, I don't know. And so we plugged these crate practice amps into these 412 cabinets. And DeVille really liked the sound of them, that big shushy metal distortion that crate amps have to this day, right? And it's like, so then I'm on the horn all the time to Crate, St. Louis Music, trying to get more and more of these, right? So I'm like, this is the guitar rig. And they're like, well, we'll send you some heads, but we're not really making them, and we'll have them in 6 weeks. And it's like, okay, send me like 8 of the practice amps to get us through, So we had all these practice amps running, and they started having this problem where the channel switching would go bad on them. So you'd have like somewhere between 4 and 8 of these goddamn things going into 412 cabinets, right, with splitters going into all these things. And a couple of them would then decide they were going to change to the clean channel in the middle of the show.
The amps themselves decided, not Sissy.
Yeah, so DeVille would come over while he was playing. He'd go, Ken, my guitar sounds like a banjo. A banjolele. My guitar sounds like a banjo, and it's like, so I'd have to run out and stick my head in front of each one, figure out which one it was doing.
And are they headlining or opening for someone big?
Opening for Rat. And it was like...
Oh, Rat Poison. I think I remember hearing
yeah,
about that.
Rat was on their way down, kind of, and Poison was on their way up. So there was even more tension there because, like, Stephen Pearcy gets really weird when he feels threatened, So he was doing all this shit where it's like, the Poison sound check would be continually pushed back because Pearcy was in readjusting the lights with the lighting crew and stuff, and it was really just weird. But yeah, so
okay, so Poison was a little thrust into the big time with maybe not being ready for it. But as you were saying, Tracy and LA Guns were pretty much a little bit more seasoned, but they, like I said earlier, they toured with a ton of guys. They toured with Nugent, AC/DC. Who else?
Nugent, AC/DC, Cheap Trick, Iron Maiden.
So what kind of crazy crap went down when you were hanging around all those guys?
That's the problem. I don't really have a weird detector, and it's like...
What do you mean? Either you mean it didn't seem abnormal to you, or you weren't around for the really weird stuff?
Yeah, no, it's like I get around people I know from back then, and I'm like, to me, it just seemed like everything was very normal, and they start that, but they go like, no, remember that time this happened, and that happened, and I'm like, well, yeah, but I mean... I don't really have these stories because it all just seems like a day at the office to me. And then people go like, yeah, but what about this? And I go, well, yeah, that happened. And they're like, that's weird. And I'm like, oh, okay, To me, it's all just, it's all just a big, it's just all a big happy time, It was very cool. I got to meet all the people that, are my sort of 70s heroes.
Well, what about, didn't Angus Young hate you for some reason?
Well, Angus hated me. I mean, we just got off on the bad foot because I was hanging out with his guitar tech who is like the best guy in the world.
I would imagine.
Yeah. It's oh God, Alan, what's his name? Alan something. I'll have to look it up or something. But he's the man. He worked for Angus Young, Keith Richards, Pete Townsend, right?
Okay.
It's like, this
That's
is
a
basically...
resume.
Yeah, and like when I went and saw The Who in '99, he was still working he was, I'm like, oh my God, there's Alan. So I'm standing there talking to him. He's like, Kent, have you met Angus? And I'm like, and I literally sweep around with my head, and I'm like, no, where? And then I look down, and he's standing there.
I'm going to interject. Like, Kent and I are both about 6'3", so...
yeah, you're a bit taller than I am. I'm a little more like in the 6'2" range,
All
but
right.
I'll never get to it. But I'm a really tall 5'9". I looked down and there he is, and that was just like the worst way to get off on that particular foot. It's like, whoa, Angus Young. Oh, he hates me. And then there were just times. There was one time the bus broke down, so they got us all off the bus at like 7 in the morning. We were hanging out in this god awful truck stop somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I was still drunk. Because it was like, 7 in the morning, which was actually a half hour before I went to bed. And it's like, I'm just being the usual loud, boisterous teenager in a truck stop in the middle of nowhere, and Angus is there sitting at this table with this young girl, and he's just glowering over me at me. It's like I'm just like, oh man.
Was it that bad that you looked over, assuming him to be 6 feet tall, and he wasn't?
Well, I don't know if who knows?
I think you probably said something assholish you don't remember, and that's really why he hates
I really
you.
didn't. I really didn't. I mean, I was very. I when I'm around those people, I revert to being this nice kid, And it's
Right.
like, if anything, I probably blew him or something, and just forgot about it. But I mean, it's Angus Young, man. It's like,
Yeah.
I had the poster,
Yeah, it's kind of, I can imagine just, wow, Angus hates me. That's
I mean,
something you gotta deal with.
I mean, I never, caught any bad vibes from him, and nothing ever came down from him. But I just catch him giving me the stink eye on occasion. Like there's that fucking guy. And it's like, dude, I'm sorry. But I mean, Brian Johnson was absolutely a sweetheart. A couple of times I got to hang out and talk with him.
Howard Stern had this hilarious story, and since you know both those guys, I'm gonna relate it to you and tell me what you think. But Howard was making his Private Parts movie, I don't know, about a decade ago or something. So he was talking about when AC/DC came in, he said, "Hey guys, it's great to see you again. That was so great how we made that movie." And I just remember there's one thing that really stands out was that you guys were going to be doing You Shook Me All Night Long for my big concert, and we wanted to get the shot just right. And I had this great idea about how the camera should pan from like AC/DC to me. So I walked over to Brian Johnson and said, "Brian, I got this great idea. Like you're gonna be, standing there, the final chords that You Shook Me All Night Long, ringing it out, and the camera's gonna pan, and I'm gonna say that was ACD or whatever he was gonna say." And he looked at Brian and he said, "What do you think?" And Brian said, "Agree." And so Howard's like, "Wow, I really didn't know what to make of that." So he said, So he walked over to Angus and he said, "Angus, I got this great idea for the thing. You're gonna finish the song and the camera will pan around and Angus just cuts him off and goes, 'Brains ain't me forte,' and walks off."
Yeah, that sounds yeah. I always make Brian Johnson sound like a pirate whenever I.
Oh yeah, do your Brian Johnson.
There's this one time we're at this party, right? Because they used to have these parties, and especially if they were hosting people. And I think at this point they had a bunch of like NASCAR people or something, so they had a big party because Brian Johnson's all into cars, right?
Right.
So I'm hanging out with him, and like when you're on the road, or at least back then, there's basically HBO and the gig, So everybody sees all the same movies because everybody's in the same hotels all the time, and it's like, so he's talking to me and he's like, "Have you seen The Islander? And what do you think of that?"
That is a much better Brian Johnson.
And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I think it's a good movie. I mean, I think it's pretty cool, And he's like, he's all, what's he say? He goes, "You've got a Scot playing a Spaniard and a Frenchman playing a Scot. What's right with that?" I was like, oh my God, I have just had my Brian Johnson moment. This is the story I will be telling to Stevie Peavy 25 years from now.
And that really brings it home. But I kind of feel like we did give LA Guns the short shrift. You've had a long relationship with Tracy Guns, and we kind of said, oh yeah, and then there was LA Guns, and they played with actual real people. Let's talk about them. But I think I remember you telling me you actually played on The Ballad of Jane, their most successful song ever.
Yeah, I played one note. I just put the magic on there,
Why did they need that one note?
Well, I don't know if you realize this, but all the bands that we're talking about, it's like the magic came with me and it left when I left,
Interesting.
And, yeah, if you know anybody who's got a band right now that could use a little magic, just let me know, and I can pop in and slather them with the.
So what was that one note you played since you decided to bring your guitar along today?
I played this. It's on the last of the verses. Like the verses all have like a line of like lyric, and then they have a little fill. And being that we were all heavy metal kids at the time, none of us really knew like major key fills. So that like Tracy plays a couple, and then Mick plays them. They go, "Oh, Kent knows this kind of shit. Hand him the guitar, right?" So it's like, and then they roll tape, and I do this. sounds like a cow being fucked, basically. That was it.
And that's the end of the last
That
verse.
was enough to take the song to like number 7 or something.
How did your BMI checks look?
My BMI checks looked invisible.
Nice.
But yeah, if you listen to the very last verse, it's like blah 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 diddly diddly dee, blah 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 diddly diddly doo, blah blah blah. It's like, and that's me.
I'm trying to appropriate it vocally, but I'm probably doing a poor job.
You could probably play it on YouTube or something right now, and you'd be able to hear it.
Yeah, well, I mean, all our legions of listeners know how to find YouTube. But Ken, so I did ask you before we were going to do this if you wanted to play some of your current heavy metal jams, but you said I'm not really doing heavy metal right now. What exactly are you doing?
Jazz Odyssey.
I know you're in a band called it's got a number in it.
Yeah,
Don't tell me.
It's called Dead Letter 6.
Dead Letter 6.
We were like, we need a name or we can't play, and we are not leaving this room until we have a name. And it was one of about 100 bizarre combinations of words I had written on a piece of paper, and the guys all liked it, so that's what we became.
So I know you've torn up the Viper Room recently, and you're probably destined for other huge
Yeah,
things.
we used that club up and threw it away. No, we've been recording, so we haven't booked anything for like September, but like October is probably we're going to start playing a lot more.
All right, well, this should be available by then on the interwebs, so I'm going to encourage everybody who likes kind of a Pink Floyd and psychedelic, highly musical. I mean,
it's not that trippy. I mean, there are 3-minute pop songs along with
right, but I'm just saying, you heard his dissertation of Randy. The guy knows his way around a little bit of theory. So if that's your thing, Dead Letter 6 at MySpace and Facebook?
Yeah. MySpace
Nice.
and Facebook, yeah.
All right, well, Ken, thank you so much for doing this. And
I'm just sorry I was so boring. It's like, here's the thing. It's like after the fact, like then you'll say something at some point and I'll go, oh yeah, I remember when this happened. You'll go, dude, why didn't you say that on
right.
the
Okay, so the naked strippers and the weird...
Oh, God, but that's the thing. I mean, this was just like another day at the office, so it doesn't stick out.
It may have been another day at the office, but if someone asked me about my day at the office when I worked at like as a gaffer in porn or something, I'd be like, yeah, these chicks
no, I mean,
were
like there was this one entire tour. I think it was like the 88, 89 tour where I had these like...
With
I always had
LA
these
Guns opening for?
I don't know. A lot of big bands.
Okay,
Probably,
go ahead.
I think it was Iron Maiden and maybe AC/DC and Cheap Trick. God knows who knew. But yeah, there was just because I always had a leather jacket, and I'd have it for about 2 years, and it would just build up all this stuff on it, and then I would just have to get a new one. It'd be all like painted and have chains and studs and buttons, and it's like this one tour. The official tour picture was I had these nipple clamps that I wore on my jacket that were connected by a length of chain, and then it was
But not to your nipples, like to the...
No, but the tour manager guy had this Polaroid camera, and it was like this became the official photo of this tour, right? So it was like anytime of day or night, one of the guys, like, that one of the sound guys or like, one of the people working on the other side of the stage would be like, Kent, you've got to come over. We can take the picture, and I'd show up and they'd put the nipple clamps on some girl and take her picture with this Polaroid camera, and then I'd go and put them back on. And the unfortunate part is at the end of the tour manager guy, like, going through like customs to like Italy or something, and they found all these photos and confiscated them,
So they weren't even... God, what a horrible pass that was where you couldn't upload the photos to your blog immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, I don't even want to know what it must be like on tour right now. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, there was no texting. It was like, when you were out there, it was like you were isolated in this wilderness sort of thing, and the only people that you knew were the people who were with you. So it was very tribal, and it was like a little gang of Vikings blowing into town or something. It was a lot of fun, but it's like, I can only imagine now that with all the sort of communications, it's like it must be very different. The unfortunate part is people are probably like making it into some sort of college dork thing because every time they can, they do, but...
Right. Well, excellent. On that note, I think we'll call it a wrap on this one, and that was Kent Holmes, the guitar tech for both Poison and LA Guns and diehard Randy Rhoads fan. Thanks, Kent.
You're absolutely welcome.
All right. And thanks to everyone out there for listening to the first episode of Heavy Metal War Stories. I hope you loved it. We're going to be doing lots more of these with lots more cool people. So please subscribe and stay tuned. Hey, and I'd love to hear from you too. So email me. Email me to start out. Why not? dsdgods@gmail.com. And let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to hear. And we'll go from there. I've been Stevie Peavy, and you haven't. See ya.